going to start with our first topic of the day that we have on the agenda, and that's repair and remedies. This has been a common topic for the last few years, and it's a little surprising. If you would say this is a buyer's or seller's market, which would you say it would be, a buyer's or seller's market today? You would think it's sellers. The last time we were in a seller's market back between 2004 and 2007, when I was reviewing contracts, we would rarely see a credit. And then during the property inspection period, during J1, we would rarely see buyers actually ask for any repairs because it's a seller's market. And they may have backups. And they'll say, I'll just move on to the next offer if you're going to ask for repairs. What's unusual and kind of weird in this market is people are still asking for repairs. I just saw one last night, and I had to blink a few times because it was like 9:30 at night, looking at the computer, and there's like 33 requests. 33 requests. And that's not uncommon. I am seeing where buyers want the whole inspection report repaired by the seller, even if they know they were competing when they got the property. And I can't figure out why, because I thought that would go away during a seller's market, but we're still seeing that. So I thought it'd be good to discuss repair and remedies. First, when is our deadline for repair and remedy? When do we have to make sure if we're going to put in a request and get an answer for that request, what's our deadline? Before J1 property inspection time period. Why is that our deadline? That's our deadline because if we don't do anything by midnight of that day, it is deemed waived. So that would mean the seller has a responsibility to respond to our request, right? They got to come back and say yes, no, or I'll do some of that by the deadline, right? Nod your head yes or no. I would go with no. Go with no. That's what I would do. Because they don't have to respond. One of the negotiation tactics for a seller is not to respond. Because what happens at 12:01 after midnight of the deadline? The buyer waives it and they lose that leverage. So if they didn't respond to that request, or they say, well, think about it, and you don't get anything signed by midnight of the deadline, what does that mean? You would take it as they refused to make any repairs. So then you would just cancel at 12:02, right? You can't because it's waived. So it's really important on how you handle these repair and remedies. Here's something else I see, is when we do ask, even if we're asking one or two items for repair or remedy, one we came into, we had some challenges recently, was air conditioning. On this side of the island, we all need air conditioning because it is hot. I mean, the summer has started in Hawaii. I've been burning up. Turn on the air. So a lot of people have split air or central air. And split air and central air, they need maintenance. So a lot of times on the repair and remedy forms, we'll see something about air conditioning. And what I see commonly is repair air conditioning system. What we ran into a few months ago was where the seller agreed to it, and then prior to the final walkthrough, they felt it had already been repaired and remedied. Well, the buyer said, no, I wanted this, this, and this, and this done. All you did was clean the filters. So it wasn't specific on what needed to be done to that split air system. So it delayed closing, and it ended up costing credits back and forth between the buyer and the seller and the brokerage. So we had to put a deal together to save it. The point here is with repair and remedies, it's really important to be very specific on what the buyer is requesting. So here's one of the most common areas I see is GFCI. Did I say that right? Or is it GCFI? GFCI. I don't know what it sounds like. You know what it stands for? Because I don't. We got ground, we got system, fault. GFCI, I'm sticking with that. Current interrupt. Ground, fault, current, interrupt. Okay, that's what it is. So that's real common where there'll be double tapping, or it won't be the GFCI outlet, one of those two other things that we see all the time. So what we'll always see is replace or upgrade to GFCI. That sounds pretty simple, right? Okay. Now let's move on. Yeah, so with that, it's easy, it's specific. That's an easy one. Let's move on to double tap, because you'll go to the electric box, and they'll double tap certain circuits. They'll have two things, one circuit supplying two different items. And you can't, that's not to code. That's illegal. It's not to code. Now that changed maybe a decade ago, but it wasn't always the case. So you will find a lot of homes that have done it since then or were built like that or did it a long time ago. So in that case, you have to be very specific on what you want to do. Because if you just say, repair, remedy, double tap, well, they'll just take one out. Well, then something won't work, right? You got two, you take one out, something's going to work. But did they comply with what you wrote on the repair and remedy form? They did. They did. So you got to be more specific. Are you going to have them add an additional circuit? And does an electrical contractor need to do that? Does an electrical contractor? It's pretty simple, right? Electrician has to do it. Well, and is there a permit that has to be?
No, not for that.
There's not.
No, not for that.
Not for $1,000. Anything electrical and plumbing needs to have a permit. And you need to use an electrician or electrical contractor. So those things need to be specifically put into a repair and remedy form. Otherwise, you end up going to that property during final walkthrough and something doesn't work because you're pulling out that one circuit. So it's really important to be specific to the repair and remedy form. I will tell you someone that hates this form. They don't like this form. They never want to see this form, and that's Lane. Lane doesn't like that form because a lot of times Lane will see a form, will say, because of all these things that are wrong with this house, I want you to give me $14,000 in credit. And then how do the lenders react to that, Lane? So if you see the form says repair and remedy on the top, and it says all these things are wrong, so we just want a $14,000 credit towards closing costs, how does that affect the lender?
Either get the repairs done or apply for some kind of closing cost credit.
Okay, so what Lane's saying, he's saying in a very politically correct way, is that either don't ask for a credit and make sure that the repairs get done prior to closing. That's what the lender wants, so they can fund the loan. Or it's got to be a credit towards closing costs with no mention of the repairs. Because you can't say, I want a credit towards closing costs, but the repairs aren't going to be done prior to closing. They won't fund the loan. So I gave you some documents. I'd like you to take a look at these documents. Let's take a look at the first one is the J1 amendment regarding agreement to repair and or remedy. This form is used when you want repairs or a remedy to specific items that they're going to be agreed upon prior to midnight of the deadline. That means buyer and seller needs to sign off on it. Now the repairs don't need to be completed until whatever the contract in paragraph J3 says they need to be done by. J4 says they need to be done by. Property maintenance and repairs. So the repairs don't have to be done in this timeline, that J1 timeline. It's just the agreement to those repairs need to be done. And it's on this form that what you want to make sure you're doing is make it very specific on what they're going to complete. Right? If you look at the back, this form looks a little bit longer, and that's because of the paragraph below. You're putting the repairs on this form. The difference is if the seller signs it, agreeing to it, they're not agreeing to the repairs. They're agreeing to an extension of the J1 property inspection time period to consider these repairs. So you're proposing it to them, and you're getting the buyer to sign, saying, this is what we want done. We want you to agree to extend our time period so you have time to consider it, and sign here and here. Okay, so there are two different forms that are used. I also provided this amendment to purchase contract. So the amendment to purchase contract is the form you would use if it's going to be a credit instead of repairs. So I'm going to give you the language. Are you ready? Seller to credit buyer, blank dollars, at closing towards closing costs. Seller to credit buyers, blank dollars, at closing towards closing costs. So you would use this amendment, and so it's a credit Buyer signs it to request. When does the seller need to sign it by? The deadline to J1, same thing, right? Because it's going to expire if you don't get that by that time. So if we're negotiating a repair remedy or a credit, we want more time to be able to do that. That's why it's better to do the inspection, the professional inspection, earlier in the timeline. If you can do it on day 1, 2, 3, better. Because then you'll get the report on day 4, and you may have 10, 11 days to be able to negotiate any repairs, credits, or remedies that you want them to do. What I see a lot of times is you may only have 2 days. And if you have 2 days, your stress level goes way up. Because at about 5:30 on the deadline of J1, you're thinking to yourself, are they going to respond? What do I do? I don't know. I got till midnight. Do I want to wait till midnight? I go to sleep at 7:30. Right? So you're trying to figure out what should you do. So you only had that 2 days to negotiate. So we want to create a long period of time, because if they're major things, you have to get estimates. And the seller, I know this sounds crazy, they don't like going with your estimates. They're going to want to get their own estimates. So you need time to do all of that stuff. Let's say that you are in a situation where you asked for 7 items to be repaired. And in those 7 items repaired, you thought they're pretty minor stuff, right? You got to tighten, you have to change out the thing in the toilet. You know, that kit, that's real common. They have to tighten the faucets in both bathrooms, things like that, minor stuff. But it's 5:30, the day of the deadline, and you don't have a response. What should you do with your buyer? You can try to extend the time period. What else can you do? Call the agent. I'm hoping you're doing that. Calling the agent and say, hurry up, I need a response. What else do you need to talk to your buyer about? Options to cancel. So if it's 5:30 and you haven't heard back, you need to have that discussion with the buyer and say, hey, if they don't agree to make these repairs, do you want to move forward with the sale, or do you want to cancel? Because we need to send that cancellation by midnight of tonight if we don't hear back. So you would even get that, if they said, I want to cancel if they're not going to make those repairs, I would get that cancellation signed, because you only have midnight tonight to send that over. You can ask for an extension. However, the extension requires the buyer and seller to sign. So you still need a response. You're kind of in a pickle there. The key is to have that conversation if you're getting close to the deadline with the buyer, so you know how to act if the deadline comes about and you don't hear back from the seller. It's very, very important. So Leslie's bringing up a really good point. We always want to document receipt. And if you're not getting a response from the seller's agent in the first place for the repair remedy, how do you know that they're even receiving your cancellation before midnight? So a good practice, Leslie says, is to CC the escrow company, because you know that they're going to have that at their record. We'll have it on our side. It'll really stamp that and say, no, we did it before the deadline. Right, good point.
Or on your email, please confirm receipt.
On your email, you could say, please confirm receipt. Right? So a few key points that we get all the time. 1, act quickly, well before the deadline so you can negotiate it. Okay. 2 is that be very specific and descriptive on what you want repaired or remedied. So there's no question, there's no subjectivity to it. And 3, have that discussion prior to the deadline with your buyer so you know what they want to do in the event you don't get a response from the seller. Right?